I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship until I had to ask for permission to buy shampoo. It sounds small, insignificant even. But when you've been slowly conditioned to believe your needs are luxuries, that tiny bottle in your hand suddenly feels like a loaded question. One that could set off a storm you're too tired to weather. But it didn't start that way. Of course it didn't. When I met Blake, I was 26. I had a job I didn't love, an apartment I could barely afford, and a car that coughed every time I started it, but I had freedom. I didn't know how much that mattered back then. Blake swept in like a dream. Confident, successful, funny in that dry, mysterious way. He listened when I talked, remembered the little things, opened doors, sent flowers to my job, told me I was too good to be stuck in a cubicle, stressed over bills and late rent. He made me feel seen, wanted, safe. 6 months in, he said the words I didn't know would change everything. Babe, you don't have to keep working if you don't want to. I make enough for both of us. I want to take care of you. I hesitated, but he leaned in, kissed my forehead, and added, you deserve to relax, to do what makes you happy. I'll handle everything else. At the time, it felt like love, real love, the kind of love that promises security, rest, and peace. So I said yes. I quit my job. At first, it was bliss. I slept in, took up baking, went to yoga. Blake would come home to homemade meals and clean counters, and he'd smile and say, see? Told you life could be easier. I thought I was living the dream, until I ran out of body wash one day. I grabbed Blake's credit card on the counter, the one he always said I could use whenever, and headed to the store. Nothing big, just a few essentials. That night, after dinner, he glanced at the notification on his phone, then looked at me. $42.16 at Target? For what? I laughed a little, thinking he was joking. Just some shampoo, conditioner, a new razor, toothpaste. His smile disappeared. You didn't think to check with me first? I stared at him. You said I could. I said for emergencies, not for splurging on random crap. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like I was some irresponsible teenager who'd spent the family savings on glitter and gum. I felt small, embarrassed, like I'd done something terribly wrong and didn't even know what it was. That was the first red flag. But I ignored it, because love makes you doubt your instincts. And I wanted to believe he was just having a bad day. But it wasn't just one day. It was the beginning of something I didn't have a name for back then. Something much darker than I ever imagined. After that night, I started second-guessing everything. Every item I picked up at the store. Every meal I planned. Every little thing that used to be normal, like grabbing a coffee on the way home or buying a new pair of socks, suddenly felt like a potential landmine. And Blake? He changed in ways that were hard to explain to anyone else. Not all at once. That's the thing about abuse. It doesn't show up with warning signs and flashing lights. It's slow. It creeps in like fog, and before you realize it, you can't see your own life clearly anymore. He started managing all the money. At first, it was subtle. Hey, I'll just transfer everything into one account. Easier to keep track of. I'll take care of the bills. No need for you to stress over that. Then, he changed the online banking passwords. Said it was for security. I didn't question it. Why would I? He paid for everything. I didn't need access, right? Then came the weekly allowance. Let's just set a budget for you, he said one evening, flipping through spreadsheets like a CFO. We need to be smart with money. I'll give you $100 a week. That should cover everything. Everything. Groceries, gas, toiletries, any tiny thing I might need. It was supposed to be enough, but it never was. If I ran out before the week was over, I had to ask him. And asking meant explaining, justifying, apologizing. One time, I needed tampons. I hadn't realized I was running low, and I was already down to $5 that week. I texted him, hey, I need a few dollars for hygiene stuff. Sorry, I wasn't keeping track. His reply? That's not my problem. Budget better. I sat on the bathroom floor and cried. It's strange how quickly you start to shrink inside yourself. You tell yourself you're just being sensitive, that you're lucky, really. He pays the rent. He buys the groceries. He hasn't hit you. He loves you, doesn't he? And in public, Blake was a dream. He'd slip a hand around my waist at dinner parties. Pay the bill, without blinking. Tell our friends, she doesn't have to work. I take care of my girl. People would smile at me like I was the luckiest woman alive. And I'd smile back. Because if I told the truth, that I couldn't buy a muffin without permission, who would believe me? I started to believe him. That I was irresponsible, wasteful. That if he didn't monitor things, I'd blow through our money and leave us broke. He told me often enough. You have no concept of value. You just swipe the card like it's magic. If I gave you full access, we'd be bankrupt in a month. At first, I defended myself. I reminded him I used to handle my own rent, bills, insurance. All on a modest salary. But then he'd twist it. And look where that got you. Living paycheck to paycheck. Don't pretend you had it together before me. It hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I had struggled. I remembered counting coins for groceries. Crying when my car needed repairs I couldn't afford. And now, I didn't have to worry about any of that, right? Except I did. I worried constantly. I worried about what mood he'd be in if I asked for gas money. I worried about using too much electricity. I worried about the tone of my voice when I asked him for anything because if I sounded too needy or too distant, he'd shut down. Or explode. He didn't yell often. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any scream. Sometimes, days would go by with him barely speaking to me. I'd replay our last interaction, wondering what I did wrong. I'd write long apology texts for being forgetful, or careless, or making him feel used. I apologized for things I didn't even understand. And slowly, I stopped asking for anything at all. That was what he wanted, I think. Not just control of the money, but control of me. My needs, my voice, my confidence. All of it became negotiable, conditional. I remember one day, standing in front of the mirror, holding a pair of jeans I'd had for years. The seam had ripped, and they didn't fit right anymore. I thought about asking Blake for money to buy a new pair, but I froze. I knew what he'd say. Didn't I just give you cash last week? Why don't you wear one of the other 5 pairs you already own? I swear, you act like I'm made of money. I put the jeans back in the drawer. Wore leggings instead. Again. Little by little, I stopped buying anything for myself. Not because I didn't need things, but because the emotional price was too high. It wasn't just the money. It was the slow, quiet isolation. At first, it felt like intimacy. Blake didn't like big groups. He preferred quiet nights at home. Just the two of us, he'd say. We don't need anyone else. And I believed him. I stopped going out with friends. He'd say things like, you know they don't really get us. They're just jealous you don't have to work. Soon, I wasn't texting anyone back. I stopped replying to group chats. When someone did reach out, I'd make excuses. Oh, I've just been so busy. Blake's been working a lot. I'm helping at home. Money's tight right now. Maybe next time. Lies. Cover-ups. Anything to avoid the argument that would come later. Because every time I went out, Blake would question it. How much did you spend? What did you two even talk about? You sure you weren't gossiping about me? And if I pushed back, even gently, he'd go cold. Shut down. Withhold money. Sometimes affection. Sometimes food. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. If I upset him, he'd forget to leave me grocery money. I'd be stuck at home with nothing but rice and a few eggs. And I didn't have a car anymore. He sold mine 6 months after I quit my job. No point in keeping it, he said. It's just sitting there. I drive you where you need to go anyway. And at first, it was fine. He took me to the store, to the doctor. But slowly, the ride stopped. Or they came with strings. You need to be ready when I am. I'm not your chauffeur. Why can't you just plan better? So I stopped asking. I stopped leaving the house. I didn't even notice how small my world had become until one day, a friend I hadn't heard from in over a year messaged me on Facebook. Are you okay? I haven't seen you in forever. You kind of disappeared. I stared at the message for an hour before closing the app. I didn't know how to answer. Was I okay? I didn't even know anymore. To everyone else, Blake was a great guy. He tipped big at restaurants, sent his mom birthday flowers, bought drinks for the table when we went out. On the rare occasion we actually went out, people would say things like, "You're so lucky. He treats you like a queen. I wish my man would take care of me like that." And I'd smile, nod, pretend. Because that's what you do when your pain doesn't match the picture. You pretend. No one saw what happened behind closed doors. No one saw the spreadsheet he kept on our fridge, listing every cent I spent, highlighted in red if I went over budget. No one heard the way he talked to me when I made a mistake. Like the time I accidentally overdrew the grocery card by $3.12. He held the receipt in his hand like it was evidence in a trial. Do you even know how to count? This is exactly why I handle the money. You can't be trusted. I apologized over and over. Promised to be more careful. Promised to check the balance next time.
He didn't yell.
He just stared at me, calm and icy, like I wasn't even a person. And then he didn't speak to me for 3 days. I cooked,
Cleaned.
tried to stay cheerful, but the silence cut deeper than any words. It made me feel like I didn't exist. But when we went to a wedding that weekend, he wrapped his arm around my waist, kissed my cheek, and told everyone how lucky he was to have me. She keeps the house running. I don't know what I'd do without her. I laughed politely, but inside, I felt hollow. I wasn't his partner. I was his possession. A well-kept secret he dressed up when it was convenient, and shoved into a dark corner when it wasn't. And yet, every time I thought about leaving, a voice in my head whispered, "Where would you go? How would you survive? You don't even have your own money." That voice wasn't mine. It was his. But it lived inside me now. They say when you give up your income, you gain time. But what they don't tell you is how fast that time can become a prison. I used to think staying home meant freedom. No commute. No deadlines. No late-night emails. But what I got instead was silence. Emptiness. Dependence. And guilt. So much guilt. I started feeling like a burden. Like every dollar Blake spent on me was a favor, one I had to repay with perfection. A perfect home. A perfect attitude. A perfect version of myself that didn't need or ask for anything. He reminded me constantly that he worked hard, that I had it easy, that while he was grinding out 12-hour days, I was lounging in yoga pants and sipping tea. Except I wasn't. I was folding laundry for the 5th time because he didn't like wrinkles, rewriting the grocery list to stay under the $80 limit, watching the clock so I could time dinner to be ready exactly when he walked in, not too early, not too late. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was staff. Unpaid. Unseen. Unappreciated. And still, I told myself this was normal. This was love, right? I remember one night I made pasta. Simple.
Cheap.
I even baked bread from scratch, thinking it might make him smile. He walked in, sniffed the air, and sat down without a word. After a few bites, he looked up and said, "You use store-brand sauce?" I nodded. Yeah, it was on sale. He pushed the plate away. "Tastes like garbage. Don't make this again." I sat there in silence while he pulled out his phone and ordered takeout for himself. I cried after he went to bed. Not because of the sauce. Because I realized I had started treating kindness like currency. I kept trying to earn something that should have never required payment. Respect. But I didn't even respect myself anymore. And that's the most dangerous part of financial abuse. It doesn't just take your money. It takes your worth. From the outside, our life looked perfect. We lived in a nice neighborhood, drove a sleek black SUV, had a house with granite countertops and a backyard with twinkle lights strung across the fence. People envied us. But behind the walls of that house, I felt like a ghost. I wasn't allowed to work. Blake said it would be insulting after all he provided. Why would you waste time earning minimum wage when I've built a life for us? He always made it sound like a gift. But I was starving for something that couldn't be bought. Independence. I started keeping small things hidden, not money because I had none. but scraps of identity. Old journals I had buried in the closet. A worn-out necklace my mom gave me before she passed. A half-used notebook where I scribbled thoughts in the early mornings while Blake was still asleep. It felt like my only safe space. Sometimes, I fantasized about leaving, about packing one bag and walking out the door. But then I'd remember. I had no money,
No job.
no credit card, no card, and no one I could call without Blake noticing. He'd check my phone, read my texts, ask questions if I was on it too long. Who are you talking to? You don't need social media. It's just a distraction. Delete those apps, they're toxic. Eventually, I did, just to keep the peace. And that's how control works. Not through a single act of violence, but through 1,000 tiny restrictions that make you forget what freedom even feels like. One night, after another long, quiet dinner where he criticized the way I'd folded his shirts, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself. And I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. My eyes looked tired. My posture wilted. My skin was pale. My lips cracked. I couldn't remember the last time I'd bought lotion or a face wash or anything just for me. I whispered to my reflection, "What happened to you?" She didn't answer, because I had forgotten how to speak for myself. The moment I hit rock bottom wasn't loud. There was no dramatic fight, no suitcase by the door, no storming out. It was over a toothbrush. Mine was old. The bristles were frayed, bending outward like a palm tree in the wind. I'd been using it for months longer than I should have, but I kept putting it off. Blake had been in a mood lately, and I didn't want to ask for too much. One morning, I quietly placed a $2 toothbrush in the cart during a grocery run. I thought, maybe he won't notice.
He did.
That night, as he went through the receipt line by line, yes, he really did that, he paused and stared at me. "What's this? A toothbrush? You already have one." I swallowed hard. "It's falling apart. I needed a new one." He shook his head.
No.
"You wanted a new one. There's a difference. That's what's wrong with you. You can't even manage $80 without wasting it on crap like this."
Crap.
That's what he called something I needed to clean my own body. Something broke inside me. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft click, like a lock turning the wrong way. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, nodding slowly while the last pieces of who I used to be scattered at my feet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at that receipt.
$2.03.
That's what I was worth in his eyes. Maybe less. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself whisper the truth I had buried deep down. This is not love. It wasn't caring. It wasn't protection. It was control.
Power.
Manipulation. And it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with freedom and the fact that I didn't have any. The toothbrush moment stayed with me. It haunted me every morning and every night. Something shifted after that. I stopped trying to please him so much. Not in a loud or obvious way. I didn't dare risk that. But inside, I started pulling away. Not from fear. I'd lived in fear for too long, but from a new kind of clarity. He didn't love me. He loved owning me. And I realized that if I wanted to survive, really survive, I had to find a way to reclaim even a small piece of my life. It started small. I began keeping the change from grocery runs. A few coins here, a crumpled dollar there. I tucked them into an old sock at the back of my closet. I told myself it was silly, pointless, but something about having even $5 that he didn't know about made me feel a tiny flicker of hope. Then, one afternoon while Blake was at work, I searched for local part-time jobs online. Nothing flashy, nothing that would raise red flags. Just something I could do from home. And I found one. A woman named Grace was looking for someone to help manage her Etsy orders, printing labels, replying to messages, scheduling pickups. I emailed her, hands trembling. "I can't be paid through a normal account. I don't have access to a bank card. Can you do cash?"
She said yes.
She even asked if I was okay. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I told the truth to a stranger. "I'm trying to leave." Grace didn't ask questions. She just replied, "You've got this. One step at a time." I cried so hard reading that. Every evening after Blake went to bed, I worked.
Quietly. Carefully.
I made $20 here, 50 there. I hid the bills under the bathroom sink, behind a stack of old towels he never touched. It wasn't much, but it was mine.
Mine.
And with every dollar, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long, long time.
Power.
The day I realized I had saved over $300, I sat on the bathroom floor and held the cash like it was gold. Because to me, it was. It wasn't just money. It was possibility. It was the space between I can't and maybe I can. I began to form a plan. Nothing too elaborate, just something real. Something I could actually follow through on if I ever had the chance. I found a battered old duffel bag in the back of our closet, the same one we'd taken on our trip to Denver, back when I thought we were happy. I packed it slowly, one item at a time. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, the journal I'd been hiding, that old necklace from my mom, and the money, every single dollar, hidden deep inside a rolled-up pair of socks. I kept the bag under the bed, covered with a stack of winter sweaters. I knew Blake would notice if it were gone. But maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't notice it was full. I didn't know when I'd go. I didn't know where. But I was readying myself. I was becoming ready, something I hadn't felt in years. And then life gave me a window. Blake had to leave for a work conference, 2 nights, out of town. Normally, he'd have made arrangements for his mother to check in on me, which always meant snooping and reporting back, but this time he didn't. I don't know why. Maybe he was slipping. Maybe he thought he had broken me enough that I'd never leave. He was wrong. That night, I waited until I saw the landed safely text and knew he was hours away. And then I moved.
Quickly.
Quietly. I grabbed the duffel bag, the cash, and my shoes. I didn't look back. Not once. I took a bus to the next town over. Grace, the woman from Etsy, met me at the station. She hugged me like we'd known each other forever. "You did it," she whispered. "You're safe now." And for the first time in years, I believed it. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks or fanfare. It felt like a quiet room, a warm cup of tea, and the terrifying realization that I had no idea what came next. Grace let me stay in her guest room. She didn't pry. She didn't ask for anything. Just left the door open, both literally and emotionally, and let me come back to life at my own pace. I slept for 12 hours that first night, then woke up panicked, thinking Blake would walk through the door. It took days for that fear to stop clutching my chest every time I heard footsteps. But something else started to grow inside me, too.
Pride.
Not loud, not bold, just a soft, steady voice saying, "You did the hardest part. You left." I began working more hours for Grace. She paid in cash at first, but eventually helped me open a bank account in my own name. She even drove me to the DMV to get a replacement ID. Mine had gone missing over a year ago, and Blake always said it was too much hassle to replace it. One afternoon, sitting in the waiting room of a women's support center, I heard someone say the words I'd been avoiding for so long. Financial abuse. It hit me like a freight train. That's what it was. Not just control. Not just manipulation. Abuse. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I had been trapped, methodically, quietly, and intentionally.
And now?
I was free. But healing? That was a whole new journey. I still flinched when people asked me about money. I still felt guilty buying things, even when I'd earned the money myself. I still heard his voice sometimes, whispering that I wasn't capable. But every time I cashed a check, every time I chose what to eat, what to wear, where to go, I reclaimed a piece of myself.
Piece by piece.
Dollar by dollar. Rebuilding wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I'd made the right choice. I missed the familiarity, even if it came with pain. I missed the illusion of safety, the predictability of control. Because as awful as it was, I knew how to survive that life. This new one? With choices, freedom, decisions I had to make alone, it was beautiful, but it was also terrifying. But each small win brought me back to myself. Opening my own checking account, buying my own groceries, choosing a toothbrush, any toothbrush, without fear of punishment. I started therapy. told my story out loud. It hurt. God, it hurt. Saying it out loud made it more real, and for a moment, I hated myself all over again for staying, for being blind, for falling for him in the first place. But my therapist said something that changed everything. You weren't blind. You were trusting. He used your love as a weapon. That's not your shame to carry, it's his. And just like that, I started letting go of the shame, of the fear, of the belief that I was broken beyond repair. Because I wasn't. I was bruised, yes, but not broken. I was tired, but not defeated. I was learning slowly how to live a life that belonged to me. A life where I made the rules, where I didn't need permission to exist. And one day, standing in line at a coffee shop, I saw a girl who reminded me of myself, quiet, anxious, holding her partner's wallet like it was a loaded gun. And I wanted to reach out and say, you don't have to live like this. Because that's the part no one tells you about surviving abuse. Someday, you'll become someone else's proof that escape is possible. It's been over a year now. A year since I walked out with nothing but a duffel bag, a few crumpled bills, and the quietest hope I've ever held. And I won't lie to you, it hasn't been perfect. There are still hard days. There are still moments where I flinch at the sound of raised voices or hesitate before tapping my debit card at the checkout counter. But I'm not the same woman who stood in that bathroom mirror whispering, "What happened to you?" Now, I know what happened. I was manipulated, controlled, stripped of dignity under the disguise of love. But I survived. And more than that, I reclaimed myself. I got a full-time job. Nothing glamorous, but it pays my bills. I rent a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever lived, because it's mine. I cook what I want. I buy what I need. I don't ask permission to breathe. I also volunteer now, once a week at a local women's center. I talk to women who are still in it, still doubting, still wondering, still scared, and I look them in the eye and say, "You're not crazy. You're not weak. And you are not alone." Because I remember how powerful it was to hear that. I remember how it cracked the lie wide open. The lie that I had no way out. The lie that I was incapable. The lie that he loved me.
He didn't.
He owned me, but not anymore. Now I own my future. And every time I open my own wallet, every time I make a choice without fear, I remind myself that I am not the woman who had to ask for shampoo. I am the woman who found her way back from silence. Sometimes I still get messages from old friends. People who knew us back then, when Blake and I were still perfect on the outside. I had no idea. You always looked so happy. But he seemed so kind. That's the thing about abuse that doesn't leave bruises. It hides in broad daylight. And when money is the weapon, it cuts in ways that no one sees, but you feel it every second of every day. You feel it when you can't buy tampons without a conversation. You feel it when you lie to your friends about why you can't meet up. You feel it when you beg for the bare minimum and get told you're lucky. And worse, you start to believe them. That was the most painful part. Not just the fear or the isolation, but the loss of self-worth. The way I started thinking, maybe I really was bad with money. Maybe I really was a burden. But here's what I've learned since leaving. If someone controls your access to money, they're trying to control you. If someone makes you feel guilty for meeting your basic needs, that's not love, that's manipulation. And if someone uses finances to silence, shame, or trap you, that is abuse. No matter how nice the house is, no matter how generous they appear to others, no matter how long you've been told you're the problem, you are not. You're not alone. You're not helpless. And you are absolutely not crazy. It took everything in me to walk away. But I did. And now, I speak for the version of me who couldn't. For the women still smiling at dinner parties while silently counting pennies. For the ones asking permission to exist. I see you. And I promise, there's life after this. I'm not rich. Not even close. But I'm free. And no amount of luxury, no perfect house or polished lie, could ever be worth more than that. Because now, I wake up every morning knowing that I am responsible for my life, for better or worse, and that no one holds the keys to my survival but me. That's what financial freedom really means. It's not about shopping sprees or brand name handbags.
It's about dignity,
Safety.
choice.
It's about being able to buy a toothbrush without it turning into a crisis. It's about knowing you can leave, that you have options, that your life doesn't belong to someone else simply because they pay the bills. So if you're listening to this and something deep in your gut is whispering, "This feels familiar," please don't ignore it. Love should never feel like a trap. It should never come with terms and conditions. And it should never cost you your identity. Financial abuse is real, and it hides in plain sight. If someone controls your money, they're trying to control your life. Speak up. Reach out. Reclaim your freedom. You're not alone. You're not weak. And you're not the problem. You are worthy, capable, and strong enough to break the cycle. I did. And so can you. If this story spoke to you, or reminded you of someone you care about, please share it. You never know who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Share your experience. Support those still suffering in silence. Hit subscribe so we can continue shining light on the stories that mattered. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of financial independence. Thank you for listening. You are not alone.